Yes.
Can.
Okay, and you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, well, welcome everyone. Since it is still January, we just want to say Happy New Year to all of our members. Just in case you are kind of webinared and online meeting out during the past year, just to let you know, you are in the Cloud Security Alliance Minnesota chapter meeting, and in case you couldn't tell by my accent. So welcome to our meeting. We have a lot of exciting speakers today, and we have a great subject that we're talking about today, data rights in the cloud. And I just want to get to these speakers right away, because this is some very interesting information to share with everyone, as well as how it can relate to you personally. So with that, we'll get to our agenda. There we go. So Rachel, I want to introduce Rachel Sones. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Christy Wackles, and Rachel and I today are co-hosting the meeting, and we are co-marketing directors for CSA Minnesota. And we have 3 speakers today. We have our sponsor, Okta. We have Sanai. We also have Jim Rivas that will be speaking, and of course, our very honored to have Brittany Kaiser with us today as well. So we wanted to also share with you some upcoming events. We don't have our exact date yet lined up for our next event, but wanted to share with you some of the subjects that will be in the content that we'll be talking about. I'm very interested to have a CISO panel perspective on cloud security in the post-COVID world. We think that will be a very interesting one, so we're working on getting that scheduled, so stay tuned for that. Just to go over some quick guidelines, right? Like we're not all used to this by now. Just keeping yourself on mute when you can. And as our speakers present, we will give opportunities for you guys to ask questions. Make sure you put them in the chat message, and then one of us will grab the question and make sure that it gets asked, and we'll respond to the question. So hang in there, we'll get through this. All right, so data rights, right? First, I guess I wanted to quickly mention it is Privacy Data Right, or Data Privacy Day today. So how unique is that we're also having this event today? So congratulations, happy Data Privacy Day. We wanted to talk a little bit about how today's speakers and subject all kind of relate to each other. And what I wanted to quickly talk about was our main speaker, Brittany Kaiser, has a couple different foundations that she has co-founded. And one in particular aligns really well with CSA's mission and some of the things they're doing. And we wanted to just quickly outline some of those, some of the relationships there. And in fact, Brittany's foundation, especially her Own Your Own Data, really is all about educating people so that they're technically savvy and digitally savvy to be able to protect themselves online. And we also wanted to just mention that her other foundation is also about getting some laws passed around protecting ourselves and our data, especially. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, and Rachel's going to have some information that she wants to share along this lines as well.
Hi, so welcome to everyone. I just wanted to help everybody understand the whys behind how our missions parallel. This is definitely an exciting topic for me for a couple different reasons. One, for CSA, but 2, from a personal level. So at CSA, we see the parallel of her mission for Own Your Data Foundation because CSA Minnesota was formed to promote the education of members on best practices, providing security assurance in the cloud, use of cloud computing, but we also know that it's an ongoing dialogue. So we work every day to try to communicate our message, try to share resources, continuously educate in this ever-changing world. The cloud has no walls, and we constantly strive to cross the boundaries to help spread that education. And from a personal level, who doesn't have parents who could use help understanding our digital age? it's constantly changing. It's changing faster than even sometimes we know how to deal with it. But parents tend to be naive with what they're sharing and how it's being used. And if we don't help to step up to share this knowledge with them, who will? Additionally, I have children who are on the internet way, way too much nowadays. And, everything that they're doing, the tech companies, big and small, are gathering all those data points about my children. And as a parent, I feel like I don't have as much control over this as I need to or should have, especially at such a young age. So all of those things are reasons why our missions parallel, and are really excited to talk about this. And, as Chrissy had mentioned, it is Data Privacy Day. So what better day to talk about awareness of the importance of privacy, how to protect information, and helping your business or other businesses remember that privacy needs to be an integral part of their processes.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we'll get on to our first speaker here. And we have Sanai Sarasanai from Okta, who is a solutions architect, and he will be speaking on safeguarding data privacy in the cloud as well. So we'll let him go ahead and get started.
Thank you for having me. Let me start sharing my screen. All right, can you guys all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, great. Okay, so my name is Sanai Sarasanai. I'm a solutions architect at Okta. Okta is just briefly a little bit about me. Okta is identity as a service provider based in the Bay Area, but I'm actually in Minnesota, working from home like everyone else. Just a little bit beyond that, on my background, without going too much detail. I know we have limited time. I started my career after finishing undergrad here in the Twin Cities with a big corporation here in the Twin Cities, and I went back to school. I actually did my master's in data mining and data management, even though the last 10 years plus I've been kind of working as a consultant deploying identity access management. So from that perspective, I'm able to see some of the challenges companies face, even from the end user or consumer, we want to call it, right? Friendly name. Some of the challenges that face around data, how much information does the user have access on their data, and why the companies need that information. So I'll go through a few slides in here, and I'll open up some questions at the end. Again, today's topic is, at a high level, safeguarding data and really in the cloud, right? This could apply anywhere, but for today's theme, obviously, I'll have some slides in here to just kind of share with you. This would be our ideal world, right? Give the customers control over their personal information. Easy to say, but we know there's some challenges around that, right? We're asked to give information when you sign up for anything from, shopping or any kind of consumer platform. You give your information up front, but then you have very little access to it, if not be able to manipulate that data, right? So this is kind of the world that we live in, and this is not to go after Facebook or anything, but really, we live in the area where we want everything. We want a lot of things. So a lot of times, especially we're hooked up. Nowadays they're at home. We're on the web all the time, right? We want everything, right? We also expect the system we're interacting with to be able to read our behavior, and then be able to shove the things that are relevant to us, that interest us. But sooner or later we realize that, okay, you know what, this is way too much for me. People are actually, I know some friends that are just kind of going away from the social platform, just find a different habit, right? You want to go back and there manipulate the data, right? Maybe you wanted to update some information. Maybe you don't want to display where you live, right? Perhaps you wanted to just delete the account, right? When you do that, first of all, it's challenging nowadays. We know if you're an Android, for example, iPhone, and how to delete certain things with different settings, most people struggle with that, right? So there's that access issue, know how to do that thing, and also is it when you do delete it, is it actually really deleted in the back end, right? We just don't know, right? This is just kind of show, yesterday, meaning, in the 90s, 10, 20 years ago even, where we had one-to-one, right? You have access to a system, your information is on that system, but now you're logging to Google, and you're through Google, for example, I'll just use that. You have access to other applications, so your information is kind of shared among other things we've seen on the news, right? Whether the election, whether other things where your data is shared somewhere else, and you have very kind of limited access, or you don't know it's been shared, right? Some of the challenges that we face today. The other thing is this, again, some of these slides are just an examples, but when you're registering, I'm sure United has updated since, but when you're registering for some kind of service online, a lot of times as an end user, you have to make that choice to give that information, continue with the service that you're looking for, or do you opt out and go somewhere else, right? So companies are looking at these and saying, okay, let's just streamline the process. Let's ask as little as possible from the end user, we'll call it consumer, right? And then give them the functionality they're looking for, right? This is a touchy point. A lot of companies are making progress on this, mostly because they have to be compliant in certain things. They can't ask certain things. So there's been some progress in this area, but again, as a consultant and as a person who's been doing some deployment around the world, actually, this is still a challenge for many organizations. Some data to share here. As the consumers, we don't like to be asked too much information, or we don't like to be asked, very sensitive information that gives away too much, that goes into our household. When that happens, we kind of look for a better solution, if you will. This, ideally, we would like to be control of everything that we have access to, whether our activities on our phone, things that we touch, or things that we shop. That would be ideal, right? But it's not. We kind of need some help around that, whether it's a government mandate or something that actually can help us do this. Right now, we have very little information around what we do and what we're trying to get with the services that we need to go our daily life. So there's been some progress. Obviously, there's especially for big organizations that I work for, I help implement identity access management. They have to be compliant with certain things. The European Union, for example, they have their own data protection. You have data residency. So for companies, including the one I work for, if you're operating in some companies, you have to be adhere to some of the regulations that data has to live within that. For example, Canada is one of them, right? The European Union. In some states even, they're taking their own initiatives to safeguard some data. And I'm sure there'll still be more out there moving forward. So really, again, like I said, I've done a lot of work around identity and how identity is important to us, and even to the companies that manage our identity. So it's kind of if you want to think of it like a pyramid notion, where if from a company's perspective, they're looking at this from a fresh perspective, and that what kind of data do they want to gather, right? Where do they want to store that data? They want it on their legacy on-premise that they normally do in the Oracle and the SQL databases, or they want it in the cloud, right? Who's going to be managing that data center, right? So they have to make some logistical and also to make sure there are compliant choices around what kind of information can they have, and then on the top of that, can they streamline this data they have and then add some automation around that, so it's not prone to a human error, if you will. That's normally what happens, right? So they're establishing some good organizations, good identity concept around that and be able to control that in a way that is repeatable and is manageable, and you can audit it. And if you get audited at some point, you'd be able to present it in a way that you say it's managed, and then kind of continue to manage that. So having that strong identity around that person, around that consumer that you have, and be able to make sure you have a strong mapping to other systems that person has access to. It basically makes you kind of, when that time comes in, something is breached, you have a better control over that. So a couple of things that that I see in the field is that some around consent, right? When you have access to companies where they're asking you for something, you need to have that consent. You need to be able to opt in and opt out. A lot of us will get a lot of spam email. They send you a little bit at the bottom. It says you unsubscribe, but that's beyond that. They need companies, that take a lot of our information. They need to give us some access to be able to manipulate and update our data, right? Have the option to change our password or clear our password, or like I mentioned, like at the beginning, be able to delete our account and forever. And that if when you do that, it's really actually deleted, right? And then also lastly, embed some kind of notifications around that, right? This is a little tricky point because I've gotten myself lately, you get a call from a credit card company saying, hey, your account is hacked, we want to reach out to you, but it's not true, right? So it's another spammer. How do you distinguish those? So there's some gray area around that. Okay, how do you notify users? Is it an email? Is it a mail? Is it a phone call? So these are kind of some challenging days, where we live in, right? That's all I have in terms of content for this limited presentation time. But from the Okta side, if you go through this link, I think my colleague Cassie is going to post it on the chat in here. You can go to that link in there and grab $25. I'm sure we can all use that for DoorDash. You have some time to claim that until the 25th, 29, I should say. Is there 29 this year? With that, I'm going to open it up for questions. I don't know if I have a little more time, right?
Thanks, Sinai. Yeah, we have a couple minutes if anybody has questions. I do see a question in here. How do you recommend social media companies be regulated?
That's a tough one. It comes up. Social media, it's one of those that's optional, right? You go in there because you wanted to use it, but you don't really need it. So because it's an optional platform, it becomes a gray area to regulate. But I'll give you an example where we deal with customers. They use social media as a way to source in their users, if you will. Sometimes maybe I can see some regulations on that to say that you can't use social media metadata. First of all, it's not clear. It's not always clear, accurate data. So that's something that beyond me. We have a long way on that because that's more of an optional platform.
Okay. I have noticed that more and more accounts for gaming and things, going back to me having kids, are requiring a social media account in order to play the different games that they want to connect to. So it'll be interesting because that's obviously underage, youth that we're talking about that now are being asked to set up a social media account simply to connect in a different way than they had to before. So
yeah, on the top of that, I think when you sign up for Facebook, for example, I think 13 is the threshold, the minimum age. But Facebook has no way of verifying that you are who you say you are and how old you are. So that's a long way to go there.
Right. Any other questions? I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. Okay, so our next speaker, I'm happy to introduce Jim Rivas. I know we'll pull up the slide here in a moment, but as was mentioned before, he's our CEO and co-founder. He has worked as a leader in the InfoSec space for many years, and is a driving force of the Cloud Security Alliance. So I'd like to hand it over to Jim.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you, CSA Minnesota, for really raising the bar in chapter events. We're definitely going to let all the other chapters know that they're going to have to do a very good job to top what you guys are doing. This is just terrific. And thank you, Sine and Okta. Okta is just a wonderful corporate member and sponsor of CSA activities around the world. And that's how we're able to do these things. So please make sure that you are taking care of our great members as well. We really appreciate them. So I'm going to be fairly succinct, hopefully, in my comments here. This is really a fundamental topic around privacy and data privacy that we are very concerned around, focused on. As Cloud Security Alliance, and knowing that security and privacy sometimes occupy different domains and worlds, and we've done events in the past with the IAPP, for example, we are always open to input we get from members on what they would like to see from us in this space. So you may be aware that our European team developed a GDPR code of conduct, both for providers and users of cloud, which is very useful. You can find it on our website. And just recently, our general counsel wrote a little bit of a white paper on explaining privacy implications to security professionals specifically. And I'm going to put the link to that in chat. It's on Circle. But essentially things like when a legal person talks about data minimization, what do you need to be thinking about as a security professional? So that's just some more information there. But let us know what you think we should be doing from a research perspective, advocacy, or anything else. And it's probably a lot of it is supporting groups and foundations like what Brittany has put together. So, you know, my view is that this is not a lost cause. I hope that's what you think. I think that ultimately, in the long run, privacy is going to be achieved as a confluence of a migration away from some of the more invasive business models. We'll need to change that. Governments affirming the rights of data ownership just around the world, and the technology that extends the crypto, authentication, blockchain, other things into more mature and usable solutions. And with as dynamic as technology is and the refreshes that we have, I think it's very possible to think about it as like jumping on that next wave as a surfer, or jumping on and off the merry-go-round. If we don't get it right one time, I think we're going to have other opportunities. But the biggest thing out of all of this, I think, is courage and advocacy and doing the right thing. And that's why it's really my pleasure to have Brittany Kaiser here. So Brittany has really become one of the globe's leading advocates of data privacy, a real thought leader, starting from her background as a whistleblower with the Cambridge Analytica incident, which took a lot of courage, and then taking it in a real positive direction and doing a lot of evangelism around this and the foundation activities, which have already been discussed. So it's with my great pleasure to welcome Brittany Kaiser to the CSA Minnesota event, and I'll let her take it away from here. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone that's here. And thank you, everybody that cares about data rights, cybersecurity, and all of the issues that we've been talking about today. So the reason why I care about data rights so much, firstly, I come from a human rights legal background. I was actually training as a human rights lawyer, not as a technologist, when I started getting into the technology field. I started in technology because I saw it as a way to amplify positive social impact. My first job in tech was joining the first Obama campaign in 2007, really early on, where I joined the team that invented social media strategy. We were the first people to start to take data off of social media and see the amount of impact that that had. All of a sudden, our engagement is amplified. We're fundraising and breaking records for political campaigns. We have people really care about our message because we actually have figured out what policies are important to them, what their families care about, what is going to have a positive impact on their communities. So I really saw these tools as net positive. And instead of joining Obama's White House, I instead decided to go traveling around the world and working with human rights organizations, nonprofits, and charities that I thought really could use the ability to learn how to take advantage of these tools for their own messages. So how do you find donors? How do you get people to care enough where you have a movement to change laws in certain countries? How do you better protect people's rights by informing them and educating them? How do you get the message out? And again, there are just so many years of my life where I, you could call me naive or you could call me eternally optimistic, which is, of course, what I prefer. And I really thought that these tools were there to make the world a better place. Now, fast forward a couple of years, I'm writing my PhD. This was my 4th human rights law degree. And what I was specializing in is something called preventive diplomacy. Preventive diplomacy means how does a decision maker, usually a world leader like a president or prime minister, how do you head off conflict before it happens, especially violent conflict, war, crimes against humanity? And while most of the research out there says it's diplomatic strategy, how do you conduct a meeting, how do you negotiate, what I found out was really it's data science. How much data do people have access to? How good are the data scientists that are analyzing that information? And how quickly does that analysis get into the hands of decision makers? This is the same for governments, militaries, companies. It's really data science and what real-time access you have to valid intelligence. That's how you can head off conflict before it starts. So no one at my law school could teach me that. And I had a friend that said he knew someone that knew a lot about data science. This person happened to be Alexander Nix, who was the CEO of Cambridge Analytica. So I went to go meet him with the idea that I could at least interview him for my PhD, but perhaps get a part-time job to support all of the flying I was doing to Geneva and Brussels to go to human rights conferences. And I did get a job there. And what I discovered over the 3.5 years that I was at Cambridge Analytica was, I suppose, I learned a lot more about data than I bargained for. That's for sure. But I really spent the first couple of years traveling around the world and meeting with either presidents or prime ministers and people that wanted to be executives of big companies, even heads of government departments and officials in the military. And we would talk about what kind of goals they were trying to achieve and how you could use data to achieve those goals. So whether it was for internal strategy or external communications, the projects were varied. How could a government figure out what they needed to build in terms of new regional hospitals because they didn't understand what types of needs there were in different parts of the country. A new political party wanted to figure out how to develop their policy platform because they wanted to know what people actually care about. A military is trying to stop young people from being radicalized and recruited into terrorist groups. All of the first projects that I saw at this company were really exciting and something that I thought, wow, I really want to be able to use data and technology for these purposes. This is so great. Now, it was near the end of my time there when the company started taking on a lot of, I would say, unsavory clients or clients that didn't really have ethical or moral guidelines about how they would use these technology tools. And that's when I started to see for the first time that instead of positive, exciting messaging that was getting people involved in politics for the first time, which is, a lot of what I saw in the Obama campaign, which was an 100% positive only campaign. right? We even would delete negative comments about other candidates if they were posted on our social media account. We just wanted to keep everything, again, positive. There's no sense in using negative campaigning if you're a good enough candidate yourself. And that's what we really believed. And I started to see at this company that I'm a part of that there were more and more clients that didn't really think that way, where they were using these tools to understand as much as possible about people in order to manipulate them, in order to target people in ways that in typical politics you wouldn't even be allowed to do. In politics we have laws against incitement of violence or racial hatred or voter suppression, but yet that was something that some of the clients of the company I was working at started to use in practice. So that's when I decided it was really time to get out of there. I had spent a while raising red flags within the company, which is normally what happens in a whistleblower situation. I was talking to lawyers all the time and then getting yelled at for creating too many invoices. I was asking for an internal data compliance officer so that we didn't have to spend all this money on expensive lawyers. I was always told that someone was being interviewed and would be hired soon, but the whole time I was at Cambridge, we never had a data protection officer. One was apparently hired after I left the company. So eventually, I left the company thinking this is not the right place for me. They're probably going to go on and be successful because they don't care about cutting corners or, they have no ethical boundaries to what they decide to use to make money. So they can go do that without me. And what I really discovered at the company as well, besides the fact that, these tools could be used by anyone, they're not net positive. They're just tools, and it really depends on the intention of the individual who's using them, or the client or the company, whatever it happens to be. What I also discovered was that, Cambridge Analytica was a small startup, yet somehow was able to spend millions of dollars on purchasing people's personal information. That the amount of data that existed about people was not really endless, but in a way, yes, because of the amount of exponential data we're creating every single day. And that even just a small startup company was able to purchase enough information, for instance, to have thousands of data points on everybody above the age of 18 in America, 240 million people, where down to a single person, you could look up someone and know everything about them. Where they live, what they buy, where they go on vacation, what their political opinions are, how they vote. And that was not surprising to me in a way, but kind of shocking that there were not more rules and regulations about who was able to get access to that information and how it could be used. That seemed really to be the Wild West. And my former CEO even called it the Wild West and said that it's an arms race. Whoever can get more data is going to be more powerful. And I started to see that coming true. While I was still in my last year there, a lot of the biggest companies in the world became the companies that have taken the most data from people. Facebook, Google, Amazon. And also that year, The Economist said that data had surpassed oil and gas as the world's most valuable asset. Yet somehow, data being the most valuable asset class in the world is the only asset class where the producers of that value don't have any rights to it. So that really confused me. As someone that came from a human rights law background, I've known that for quite a long time we've had the human right to privacy, yet I don't really see privacy existing. So I started to think, what types of laws and regulations do we need in order for this actually to change? The whole landscape, which has been built in a kleptocratic way, how much value can you take away from people in order to create more money for your shareholders? There didn't seem to be enough of an ecosystem where you could have a trustworthy and transparent relationship between business and consumer, and that would be the more successful business model, which obviously seemed incredibly confusing to me. So I left Cambridge and started a nonprofit trade association called the Digital Asset Trade Association, or DATA for short. And we started engaging in legislative drafting, lobbying, started passing laws around owning your digital assets as your intangible personal property, and started to think about those definitions and how your digital assets could be handled. I love speaking to a group of Minnesotans, actually, because also one of the first things I did was started doing expert witness testimony work, specifically working on data breach cases. And in the state of Minnesota, I worked with a group of lawyers who were basically filing against Equifax for property damage for the data breach. And so we invented a strategy called mass tort, where we actually had over 500 people sue in municipal court for damages to their property against Equifax. And that ended up getting kicked up to the Supreme Court, where we won. So in the state of Minnesota, you actually own your data as your property as well, because Equifax was found guilty for property damage for the data breach. That's the only case law in the United States so far. So that is pretty exciting. You have more data rights in Minnesota than, in my opinion, than you even really do in California, just because of that precedent, which is really cool. And a lot of you probably didn't know that. But I started doing this work, and at a couple months after I left the company, all of a sudden there's a headline that Cambridge Analytica and Facebook had been involved in a much bigger data breach than anyone had ever thought of, that Cambridge Analytica might have used Facebook data that it acquired improperly on the Trump campaign and perhaps the Brexit campaign, and that they hadn't deleted some data set. And I had quit the company, but I quit the company while I was traveling. And so I still had my company computer, and I said, well, I told them I'd turn it back in when I got back to New York next time. They didn't seem like they were in a rush to get it back. Let me check, because I'm pretty sure I was copied in on those emails with Facebook. And what I discovered was not only that my chief data officer had lied to Facebook, but that Facebook hadn't really asked Cambridge to certify that they had really deleted the data. There was no contract involved. There was no serious due diligence, no investigation of their database. Facebook just took the word in a written email that said, oh yes, we've deleted this, and that was it. So I saw gross negligence on behalf of Facebook. I saw lies coming from the data science team at my former company. I thought, oh God, there's probably a lot of people around the world that are wondering what just happened and need more information. So I guess if it's not me, there's probably no one else that is going to step forward and do this. So I went to the Guardian newspaper and said, well, I still have my work computer. I don't work at the company, but I really think I've got some information that you might be interested in. And at the time, I thought I had enough information to perhaps write a strongly worded op-ed about data rights and maybe do something like that with them, which was not what ended up happening. The Guardian put together a package of 5 different investigative articles plus a video, and that package went totally viral. Hundreds of millions of people seeing it, and since then there's been about 5 million articles about both Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and this data scandal, me as a whistleblower. My film, The Great Hack, where we were nominated for an Oscar, BAFTA, Emmy, and my book, Targeted, published globally by HarperCollins, and about 20 new data laws, and about at least 20 countries around the world writing their first data protection and privacy laws, and people in Congress that don't know really how to use a computer for the first time actually talking about privacy and caring about it. We have had entire countries implement digital literacy education programs into their public school curriculums, et cetera, and so forth. So this massive momentum that, in my opinion, really started with Edward Snowden in 2013, where his revelations showed not just what governments were collecting about individuals in terms of their data, but also what private companies were collecting. And that was the beginning of kind of this huge conversation about who gets access to our data and why. But unfortunately, what most people clinged on to for Edward's revelations were the PRISM project and the NSA and what is government doing with our data, even though he talked a lot about companies. So it wasn't until myself and Chris Wiley came out as whistleblowers against Facebook and Cambridge Analytica that people really started to think about the companies that they use their platforms every single day. There started to be this renaissance of people starting to understand what your data actually is, how valuable it is. What does transparency mean? How do you figure out what data is being collected about you? How do you consent to your data being collected or not? How do you withdraw consent? What does the right to delete mean if you want to actually get your data out of someone's database? These are all, unfortunately, new concepts. A lot of them came up in GDPR, which was passed a couple months after I came out as a whistleblower in the EU. It was May 25th, 2018. And that was the first time where we saw, for instance, concepts like purpose limitation. So if you are to collect data for a specific purpose and people are opting into that purpose, that data cannot be repurposed. You have to get another opt-in. Someone has to agree for their data to be used for a very specific purpose. In fact, earlier last year, at the beginning of the pandemic, I wrote the first coronavirus contact tracing data protection law, which took purpose limitation as a concept and put it into the public health and law enforcement realm. So we said, if companies or governments are going to collect data for public health purposes to stop the spread of coronavirus, save human life, you then, for instance, cannot share that data with law enforcement who could use it to target peaceful protesters, which is unfortunately exactly what happened last June during the rise of the BLM movement. Contact tracing data that was collected for coronavirus purposes was used to target peaceful protesters. And those types of issues are just, one salient example of the wider problem of the data industry, right? And this is something that gets more important every day. We are producing exponentially more data every single day, especially given that we have been thrown into a completely digital life for the first time ever. No one was really prepared for that, but now we live on our devices. We have hardly any real human contact, or at least that's true for most people. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. We are starting to move into a world where the Internet of Things, IoT, is becoming more apparent in our daily lives. Soon our fridges and our robot vacuums and our coffee machines are collecting data about our daily lives and reporting that back to companies. We're building smart cities infrastructure where everything you do within the place that you live is going to be recorded and tracked, obviously for a lot of good purposes, but still. We're about to be producing exponentially more data in a way that some of you probably haven't even thought about before. I've been to tech conferences in Asia where they show me wall paint that collects data about how you move around a room. And that could be painted on the wall of any place that you walk into, right? So if we start to think in those terms, we're really in the beginning of data production. Although we produce exponentially more data every day, we're finally getting to a point where advanced predictive analytics and data science, artificial intelligence, IoT, smart cities, infrastructure is really starting to expand at a level where I think it's imperative that we get to grips with what our data rights are now, because this question is only going to become more complex as time goes on. And if we're going to look at this in a historical perspective for a second, you know, data being an asset class, many other asset classes that used to come in a very exploitative nature, where the landowners or the people who originally produced those resources had their resources stolen from them. Now, under most legal infrastructures in countries around the world, the original owner or producer of an asset or a resource retains some of that value. Even if it's a fractionalized percentage and we own a small bit of it, we retain some of that value and therefore usually some rights. So I think it's important to talk a little bit more about what are the fundamental components of data rights that not only I find to be important, but that are usually defined within law. So the first is really transparency. Knowing what data is being collected about you. We're currently in a time where for the first time ever, we're seeing government agencies that say the terms and conditions that none of us ever read. The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, is now saying, okay, well, that goes against consumer protection standards because you are tricking people into doing something that they don't really realize they're being tricked into doing. I mean, I know a lot of you guys don't have your cameras on, but raise your hand if you've actually read the terms and conditions recently of any app that you've downloaded. Because most of you, I would assume, don't have your hands raised right now. Some of you might, but usually most people don't, even when I'm talking to the most technical of audiences. And that's for a reason.
3 people.
Okay, perfect. Yes, got some in here. Well, I'm sorry that you 3 people have had to torture yourself, because really it is almost like torture to go through terms and conditions. Those are written in what's called legalese, so legal speak, with lawyers that make it purposefully too complex for you to understand what you are agreeing to do. Because if you actually read those terms in plain English, you would probably say no. But somehow we've gotten into this habit of just signing digital contracts without reading them. Sometimes we do that hundreds of times a day, depending on how much research you do, how many web pages you visit, how many applications you use. But if anyone ever walked into your office and handed you a pile of paper contracts, you would never flip to the end and sign them and keep doing that all day long. You would always read the contract if it's on paper. But somehow we've decided that digital contracts don't matter and we're happy to sign them without reading. And that's how, unfortunately, we've gotten ourselves into this situation. Obviously, we've been manipulated into that, but still we are allowing this to happen to ourselves by accepting these terms and signing these contracts with companies and willingly giving our information away. Luckily, I would say it's not really informed consent, and now I have the FTC's backing for that. So hopefully soon we're going to start to see the same demands like have come with GDPR, which is once GDPR was enacted, any website that could be collecting data from European citizens now gives you the ability to toggle on and off what you agree to and what you don't. Instead of just accepting cookies or not being able to see the web page, you now have a choice. That comes from GDPR, not from anything else, which is, for those of you that don't know, the General Data Protection Regulation. So somehow GDPR has still had a good effect on us as Americans, even though we are not European citizens. So besides that transparency, just knowing what is being collected about us, do we get to know? Do we not get to know? The way that the law is going is that we do get to know. We have to be told in very simple English, 3rd grade reading level, what is being collected about us. And then we go to opt-in and permissions, consent. So what data is being collected about us is on the transparency side, but then what is going to be done with it? How many hundreds or thousands of data partners does a company have where they're planning on selling your data on that marketplace? What do those companies do? What is that data actually going to be used for? So if you've ever gone into privacy settings or gone into terms and conditions, a lot of them these days will actually show either who their data partners are or what your data might be, what might be done with your data. And if it's GDPR compliant, at least, you'll be able to toggle that on and off. So you can opt out and still use the platform or read the article, whatever it happens to be. So that consent and permission structure is so important. I mean, think about, for instance, I might be totally happy to share my data with advertisers that are selling me clothes or selling me new books to read, because I want them to show me things that are interesting to me. That's cool. But maybe I'm not comfortable with sharing my data with political parties for obvious reasons. So thinking about that, I think is incredibly important. Now, next is tracking and traceability, which I think is more on the compliance side. So can you track and trace where your data is actually going? So if I have consented for my data to only be used, for instance, for a year, and only to be for, commercial advertising for products that I agreed to see, then can I tell if my data has been shared with political parties illegally or not? Is that possible? It's starting to become possible. I mean, I'm a huge advocate of blockchain and distributed ledger technology and other forms of advanced encryption for tracking and traceability. Smart contracting is one of my favorite parts of DLT, where you're really being able to write a digital contract. So I can say, I agree for my data to be used by these people for these purposes for this long and not for this or that. And I want to be paid, 30% of its value. And then that's a self-executing contract. So I will automatically be sharing my data for all of those purposes, for those reasons, and I'll just get paid incrementally every time my data is being used. These technologies exist and they're starting to get to enterprise level, which is really exciting for me. And so on that back end where I said, I'm going to own 30% of the value of this, that's data monetization. And that's my favorite fundamental concept of data ownership, meaning you own your data like your property. You are the producer of that asset. It fundamentally belongs to you, and you can give up some of those rights. You might give up those rights for the platform that produces that data. For instance, being comfortable that, a social media company might own 70 or 80% of the value of your data, but you own 20 or 30% because it's yours. But they're the ones that created the platform that even made the data set in the first place. So, we've got to find some way for this still to be commercially viable. But that means every time that they use your data, you're all of a sudden getting 20 or 30% of that value. That's already a similar model that's being used by companies all around the world. It's been used for decades. It's also known as a loyalty program. So you agree to give your data to your local grocery store, and they collect all of your shopping habits, and then you get, coupons for free food next time. You share your data with your airline company, and you get miles, so you can buy a free flight eventually. This is pretty normal, so I'm not asking anyone to really think outside the box. This is tried and true business models that are incredibly normal and successful. They build trust between a company and a consumer, and also provide transparency. You are giving me your data for these purposes, and you're going to get rewarded for it because your data is valuable. So whether or not you see those coupons, discount, airline miles as value or not, which you should, what you're really doing is you're trading data for value because your data is valuable, and that's what that exchange is, right? So one of the main reasons why I think that data ownership is one of the best options for privacy and data protection law in general is because with the amount of value that our data creates around the world every single day, this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. It is the most valuable industry in the world. We each could at minimum make a couple dollars a day. That might not mean a lot to us that have salaried jobs, went to college, etc., and so forth, but 2 billion people on this planet live on less than $2 a day. So if they can make a couple dollars a day, that all of a sudden raises a good portion of the world out of extreme poverty. Because with the value of your personal data, you all of a sudden can at least feed yourself and your family. You can buy groceries with the value of your data. There isn't any other proposal out there that just with a phone, which most people around the world have a phone, even if it's basic, that you could earn enough value on that device to feed yourself. And that is really easily proven. There's Mark Zuckerberg that says your Facebook data alone is worth $17 a quarter. Now, I know for a fact that it's worth a lot more than that, but say just your Facebook data, $17 a quarter. We're already starting to get to that value. And Facebook is one of millions of platforms around the world. It's one tiny place where you can monetize your data. Think about for government, healthcare, education, smart cities, research, like all of these different things where you could become a data input into algorithms that are really running the world. Some of us are already data inputs into those data systems no matter what. But we need to really start thinking about how we could potentially drive AI and data science to make the world a better place while making sure we are still protected. So I don't consider myself a privacy advocate. I consider myself a data protection and a data rights advocate. And the difference is I will never tell anyone that you are better off never sharing any of your data. The whole idea of privacy and never sharing data is a fear-mongering tactic to say, if you share your data is not safe and you are not safe. Something bad could happen to you, which right now is true, obviously. Like none of your data is safe, but it doesn't have to remain that way for the next couple of years. We're moving towards different systems and platforms and technologies that allow us to safely share our information securely and anonymously or pseudonymously. And what that means is that we can allow AI and data science, which is here to make the world a better place, allow that to thrive. For instance, if all of us could become inputs sharing our medical data securely and anonymously, then all of a sudden we're going to start seeing cures to diseases that we never thought possible. Because right now the majority of the medical data that exists for researchers is 18 to 35-year-old young white men that go to medical trials for extra beer money in college. And that's the sad reality. It means that most medicines don't work as well on women and minorities. And that's a data issue. We don't have the right to easily become data inputs into research, but with a lot of new technologies that are coming out, we do, right? We could become data inputs to smart cities infrastructure to make sure that when we're sharing data from our car, our location, or even some stuff off of social media, we might be able to help stop the next traffic accident, make sure there's not the next mass shooter or terrorist attack, or even just simply have the city run more smoothly, right? So there's a lot of opportunity that's coming. There's a reason why the late, great Dr. Stephen Hawking said that technology was meant so that one day we all may live in luxurious leisure. I think at a time where we've seen unrivaled unemployment rates all around the world, and we're starting to think about the future of employment and jobs, the future of work. that we need to start thinking in these terms. How could we share data enough to at least secure our own rights, feed ourselves, take care of our families every day if we don't have a job? So earning your money off of your personal data, off of engaging in time and attention tasks, which is a lot of what runs the data economy, all of that is very possible to be a job of the future. If all of us were plugged into these systems right now, we all would have received our government check in milliseconds instead of in months or never at all during the pandemic. So we do have these 21st century technology, just the government isn't really using it yet, which is one of the main reasons why I spend so much time engaging with government and making sure that these technology companies that are building incredible tools to help us protect our rights, that those companies are empowered and that those tools grow. So besides advising technology companies and working with the government on legislative and regulatory initiatives, as was so kindly mentioned earlier, I founded my Own Your Data Foundation specifically to democratize access to what's called digital literacy or digital intelligence education. So we really concentrate right now on kids, parents, and teachers. And what we teach is a curriculum called DQ. This is now the IEEE global standard in digital literacy education. Like IQ or EQ, it is a digital intelligence quotient that's been developed over the past 10 years by a lot of the world's top technology think tanks and government departments and universities. And this DQ concept also gives you a DQ score, just like IQ or EQ. And so there are gamified tests that you can take to get your DQ score. And there are 8 fundamental components of this course that teach you what you really need to know to not just be safe online, but to be informed and therefore successful. So it'll teach you everything from, what are your data rights and how do you protect them? What are basic cybersecurity protocols? We teach media literacy so you can spot fake news and disinformation and hacking and phishing attempts. We teach using emotional intelligence online so that you don't become the next cyberbully and you can protect yourself from cyberbullying. We teach things like device addiction and how to make sure that you can protect your mental and physical health while using technology, especially for kids that are now on technology 24/7 for schooling and even for hanging out with their friends, right? All of us were thrown into this situation without expecting it. So we're obviously expanding our programs from children and parents and teachers. We're writing curriculums for high schools, colleges, government training and professionals training, because I think, as most of you that work for different companies or government departments would know, that the biggest cybersecurity risk of this year is that everyone's at home on unsecured devices. And most people don't know how to spot a hacking or phishing attempt, and that's the weakest link in anyone's cybersecurity strategy. So we're finally getting to a point where people are aware enough of these issues that they're willing to learn. I think a couple of years ago we weren't in that place, but we really are today, which is why I have a lot of confidence in the types of new laws that are coming out. I have helped write a lot of them, or have helped advise or advocate for some of them. But we have not just state laws, but federal laws that will hopefully be able to protect Americans in a more comprehensive way than we are protected right now. We have no federal legislation that protects our data, just in the state of California. So it's pretty sad that we're in this situation, but at least I know that data protection and privacy law, as well as regulation of social media and dealing with Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, all of these things are at the top of the agenda for the new administration and the new Congress. So really excited to see what happens over the next couple months. But we're definitely sure to see some very exciting movements There's everything from the Corporate Executive Accountability Act, which says that if through gross negligence, an executive of a company knowingly allows, or even unknowingly allows through gross negligence, a data breach, like what happened with Equifax and with Facebook, then that is now criminal liability that they have, not civil. Because as you probably saw on TV, Facebook got a $5 billion fine for their last data breach, and they made more than $5 billion back that day from all the press they got about it. So it didn't really make them change their behavior, didn't make them take any strong moves on consumer protection. In fact, the opposite, it showed them that they could be invincible and not be held accountable. So I think that executive liability and criminal liability for these types of breaches is incredibly important. But if you show that you've done everything right and that you have shown no negligence whatsoever, you've done your diligence, you have a cybersecurity set of protocols in place, you're using the right platforms, you're using the right tools, then that should never be a problem for you, even if you do get hacked, because these laws are not meant to disadvantage companies that are doing the right thing, which is the majority of companies. The majority of companies are trying to do the right thing. It's meant to protect people from bad actors who are knowingly violating people's rights. Now, there's also other exciting laws like the Data Dividend. The Data Dividend means, like what I was talking about earlier, where you can have technically fractionalized ownership over the value of your data. So every time your data is monetized, you are receiving a portion of that monetization, a portion of that value. And that's where you start to earn that passive income, which would be pretty good for everyone right now. I mean, people like Andrew Yang and his team, as well as Governor Gavin Newsom of California. I and a handful of other people are really big fans of this data dividend concept. I even think that the data dividend could be an easy way to pay people a universal earned income. I don't say basic income because there's nothing basic about it. You earned it. It's your value that you are producing. So it's an earned income. It's just passive. Although if you want to be more active, there are tons of options for you earning money through your data. I use some of those options in my daily life. For instance, you could be using Brave browser instead of Google Chrome. And while your privacy is protected on what you're searching, you're earning cryptocurrencies, which can easily be turned into dollars if you'd like, or Bitcoin if you like that better. And you are earning that money just for using a search engine, for instance. And there's more and more of those options that are starting to come out. So I'm really excited to, I actively help with the proliferation of, the amount of users on these types of platforms. We're now seeing some of these platforms that pay you for your data that have millions of users, that have the ability to have more than that. And we're finally getting there. Over the next couple of years, you're going to see a lot more of this that's really at the enterprise level. So I want to make sure that I leave plenty of time for questions, obviously. So I'm going to round up here by really saying, what I really see as a huge opportunity for the data protection movement, for the privacy movement, is that over the coming years, we're going to see all schools teaching digital literacy curriculums. When we were young, some of us, when we were taught how to use a computer, we were basically told, oh, well, here's a keyboard, here's an email client, here's how you type an email, here's a search engine, here's how you ask a question and get an answer. None of us were ever told that everything that you're typing is being recorded and then sold and traded around the world to anyone who bids on it. Because I'm pretty sure that if you told kids that these days, because I do, that they make different choices about how they use technology. And you can say, hey, if you want to search for things on this search engine, everything that you say, you're the only one that's ever going to see it. But if you use this one, then that information is tracked and traced and always pinned back to your name. You can never delete it. It's with you forever. And any company around the world could buy that information and know that those are the things that you search for. What would you have done if you were told that when you were first shown how to use a computer, right? So we have the opportunity to instill digital intelligence in younger people that don't have these bad habits yet. And through storytelling and, you know, these types of events, we have the ability for even people like me, I have terrible habits sometimes about some of this stuff, for all of us to actually think harder before we make decisions about how we use technology and how we give away our data or not. I also see, you know, as I said, huge opportunities in new laws and regulations. If you guys have never called your legislator to talk about what you believe or what you care about in terms of data protection and privacy, I highly recommend you do. They're not usually available, so you can call and leave a message, and that message is recorded as a data point for them, or you can send an email. And when they get a phone message or an email from you saying, I care about privacy law, please vote on it, please bring it up in Congress, then the more of that they get, the more they are legally bound to actually taking action on that. So I have a lot of hope that they're going to hear a lot from their constituents over the coming months about these types of laws and regulations. And then, of course, as I said, I have such hope and optimism for a lot of the new technologies, especially coming out of the blockchain space, that are, you know, as we heard earlier, digital identity, such an important concept. Digital identity, transparency, permission structures, smart contracting, and data monetization platforms, data wallets where you can put your own data anonymously on a marketplace and get paid for it. Those technologies are developing, and I think, you know, in the next couple of years, we're going to see where they'll be at a capacity where if everyone in the world wanted to use them, then that would be possible. But a lot of them are available either on beta, or they have, you know, a couple million users and probably need to stay around that size of user base for a little bit as they grow. But definitely happy to share links and lists of all of these types of opportunities for everybody here to check out. So I guess I'll leave it there so we can go into questions if you guys have anything that you're thinking about. But I just wanted to thank you guys for having me here. And congratulations on living in Minnesota, where you have more data rights than anywhere else besides California in this country. So, you know, you're living in the right place if you ever wanted to enforce your rights in a more serious way.
Well, thank you so much, Brittany. You covered so much, and this is such a huge movement. I just want to thank you personally for stepping up and helping to lead the way, because this is a huge beast. With all, you know, we all have all these new technologies and new tools that many of us have never even dreamed about before, and it seems so great. I feel like I'm very much an optimist as well. But when you start to think about the ethical, moral, and government lagging in guidelines and laws, it really makes you think about it differently. So there's a long way for us to go, but it was great to be able to hear about the interesting concepts and models about how we own, regulate, and monetize our own data. I think that's going to be really interesting to see what comes up. So I'll open it up. If anybody has questions, please feel free to unmute yourself while you're asking the question. Otherwise, we do have a few questions in the chat. If you would rather type in your questions in the chat, I'll read them as they come through. So I'll start with our first couple of questions. How do you think social media should be regulated?
Yep, that's one of my favorites. So there's an interesting predicament that we found ourselves in, which is that social media is a Wild West. Unlike, you know, what a lot of the rest of the technology landscape is starting to look like, social media is still the Wild West, because we have certain laws and expectations in our physical or analog lives that somehow we haven't been able to enforce in our digital lives. For instance, as I mentioned earlier, we have laws against voter suppression and incitement of violence. But if you see an account on social media that pushes out content that has to do with voter suppression or incitement of violence, you might see that content banned, you might see that person banned, but if you saw someone yell that in a public square, they would be arrested. So for the past many years, somehow we've been in a situation where, because of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which says that social media platforms are not publishers, all of us as individuals are publishers, so they're just hosting individuals who are publishing things. It means that they are not being held accountable for content that is on social platforms. But also, about 60% of all accounts that are on Facebook are fake. Same with Twitter. They're run by bots or troll farms, so they're artificial intelligence driven. They're not real human beings. Therefore, if someone incites violence, that someone might be a bot, and therefore you can't hold that person accountable. Or they might have an anonymous account. Therefore, you can't hold anyone accountable. So we have social media companies not held accountable, individuals impossible to hold accountable, because social media platforms do not do identity checks. At least most of them don't. So we're in this no man's land. And so where I see this going is that our digital lives are going to be regulated the way that our physical lives are. At least that's what I advocate for, because it's the only thing in my mind that makes sense. If you can't scream something that that causes someone to be murdered in the middle of a square, you shouldn't be able to say it in front of billions of people on Facebook. But this has been allowed to proliferate for so many years that, then we see what happened on January 6th at our Capitol. And that's many years of incitement of violence, racial hatred, divisions being allowed on social media platforms, which is not usually allowed in physical spaces. So what I see happening is, if things are illegal for us to do in person, they're going to start not being allowed in the digital space. And for most of time, that's not how the digital space has been governed. You've been allowed to be anonymous and say and do whatever you want without any repercussions. But I really don't think that it's going to continue that way. So you are either going to have to be identity checked, and this is where I think that digital identity platforms are going to be essential. You're probably going to have multiple digital IDs that you use, different avatars, where on the outside you could be using an avatar or a pseudonym so that you can be anonymous, but the amount of information that you've given to the digital identity platform means that they know exactly who you are. So your most personal private information, like your actual name and your address, your social security number, any of those things would never be shared with anyone ever. But you would share a public key that could verify that you are at least 21 years of age, or you definitely live in the state of Texas or Minnesota, or whatever it happens to be. And so if you are using your digital identity to sign into Facebook, for instance, and then you spread disinformation about the election that actually causes tons of people to not be able to vote, then you are the person that's held accountable. Actually, today was the first time I've ever seen someone actually be arrested for elections intervention for purposeful disinformation that they spread about how to vote in the election. Today. First time. Happy International Data Protection Day, I guess, right? But these are the types of debates that have been difficult up until now, but I have always, as someone that was trained in actual law, I feel like a lot of the people that are in this debate are not thinking about what laws we actually have or do not have in the rest of our lives. And so we're going to have to start expecting that those laws will exist in the digital space. And so if social media companies are not going to be held accountable for the content that their users produce, then users are going to be held accountable for that. And, you know, whether or not certain platforms allow you to retain your anonymity or not is really going to be a question of every platform's policy. But I still believe in people being able to be anonymous online, but not being able to break laws anonymously. So if you break a law online, then at least the platform will know who you are and you can be held accountable for that. So I don't think having like interacting in the digital space without you being able to be identified should you break a law, I don't think that's going to continue for much longer, actually.
Okay, interesting concept. It makes sense though.
Yeah.
So we have another question here. What's your opinion about companies such as Cali that will pay an individual to share their info with Cali clients? I believe it's Kalli.
Wait, let me see. Is this written in the group?
Yes, the group.
Cali clients. Sorry, I thought you meant California. So
That's why I wanted to specify.
Yes, I just wanted to read it. Can you read that to me one more time?
Sure.
Answer in a CCPA type of California legislation way, and then I realized that wasn't what it was.
Sure. Your opinion about companies such as Cali that will pay an individual to share their information with Cali's clients.
Mm-hmm. So I think as long as these types of business models are being transparent and they're being held accountable for how they use that data, then I would love to see more of that business model. As I said, traditionally, there are tons of companies that already compensate you for your information. So you answering questions or you sharing data, but it could be in the form of points or coupons or discounts. I think now there's going to be a lot more business models like, you know, not just medical trials, but market research, where you get paid, you know, $20, $50, $100 for being a part of a series of surveys or like a working group on something, a focus group. And that is one of the best ways to actually gather data. I mean, when I was at Cambridge Analytica, when we did research, we always did focus groups and surveys, and then we built our models and algorithms. And we would sometimes do focus groups with thousands of people and then do surveys with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. And yes, most of those people were paid. Even if it's just a couple dollars, some of them were paid more to participate for their time and attention and the data that they were willing to share. So as long as a company is being transparent about what their intentions are, and that they're only going to use data for the purposes for which they say they're going to use that data, then great. You know, I'd like to see more of it, to be honest.
Okay.
Hey, Brittany.
Any other questions? Oh,
Yeah, I have a question. So I get it that there's solutions moving forward, and that's cool, and I appreciate all the different insights. I definitely learned a lot today. How do you fix everything, all these repositories of information that people have about themselves, and how do you put controls around that? Is there any thoughts or solutions or any ideas that you have about that?
You mean, okay, so I'm going to take this question in two different ways. One is all of the information about you that's already out there.
Yes.
How you protect it. Well, you have the right to ask for companies to give you a copy of that data if you are either a European citizen or a Californian citizen. When we get federal legislation in the US, everyone will have this right. And I would suggest first to every company, I do have automated solutions for doing this, by the way, and I'll share that information with you guys, but you can demand that you get a copy of all of the data being held about you. You can withdraw or revoke consent for your data to be used for any other purposes. and then you can request the right to delete. Now, there's an app called Revoke, Revoke, and it will do this automatically for you under GDPR and CCPA. So you can log in, you give them your basic details, and it will show all of the data breaches your data has been in and all of the companies that currently hold your data for marketing purposes, usually tens of thousands of companies. And you can automatically request a copy of your data, which is what I suggest you do first, so you have your own record. You can revoke consent, and then you can demand the right to delete. And so that's the best solution that we have right now for dealing with all your data that's already out there, because that's unfortunately a very difficult thing, and that's the easiest way that you can do something going forward. But I guarantee you your data is still going to be on people's servers that you can't get to and will probably never delete it, right? So that's just a reality. So when we're thinking about data protection, we're really thinking about all the data that we produce from now going forward, and also protecting kids who haven't already had their data on millions of servers around the world. But for all of the data that you own everywhere, actually being able to make use of that, there are a lot of cool new companies that are coming out with options for that. One of them is called Memory. Again, I can send you guys like a list of links and resources that I think will be really interesting for everyone to follow up with. But it basically is an AI that helps you collate all of the data that you have in every single place. It has a zero knowledge proof as part of the technology, so it can't read any of your data, but it helps you figure out where all of your data is and is able to use algorithms in order to do things like help you better organize your time, help you monetize your time or your data and things of that nature. Because I don't know about all of you, but I have multiple phones and like 20 different email accounts and 7 different social media accounts. And, you know, I can't even tell if one person has texted me because they might have texted on a platform that I don't check for a couple weeks or something like that. So why isn't there some way where I can have in one centralized location a way to see that someone is trying to communicate with me? I have to individually check absolutely everything. And that's really something that digital identity technology is going to help solve, which I'm really excited about, because if you are signing in with the same public key, so you're saying I am, you know, whatever the letters and numbers are of your public key, every time that you log in with something like that, your digital identity platform could help you collate all of the data that you create with that particular identity. But we're not there yet, because right now we're using individual logins and passwords and identities for every platform that we have. But soon that will be solvable. And I mean soon as in there are some things you could already try, and there are some things that will be more enterprise level in the next year or two.
Thank you.
It's like single sign-on for all of us. Okay, any other questions?
There is, believe it or not, a lot of good things potentially come out of Facebook. And there's one that I heard interesting from my friend, is that Facebook could look at pictures and then identify health problems. Okay, and so and you know, I can't, I guess long story short is that we have this technology available, and you know, with what you're saying right now is on one side, it's like, you know, we want to put guards around it, but if someone knows something and could identify a potential disease, isn't it our right to share it with that individual? Like, where do you draw the boundaries when it comes to things like that? Like, when really a technology in one sense is really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's, again, why I say I'm not a data privacy advocate. I'm a data rights advocate, because I would say that probably most of us, if we were given the choice to share our data in order, for instance, for companies to figure out whether or not we're ill before we actually become sick, so that we're more likely to be able to treat it, I would opt into that, and I would share my whether it has to be my facial recognition data or my medical records in an anonymized way, if and when that's possible, then I would do that. Maybe not everyone wants to do that, so we should give everybody the choice. And I'm more of an advocate of individual rights than anything else. Not really a utilitarian, which is, oh, let's think about what's good for everybody. Let's think about what everyone wants for themselves. And if you as an individual are comfortable with that, then you should be able to opt into that, but you should be fully informed about what that means, right? You should know what data they're collecting about you, who else they're sharing it with, for what purposes those companies could possibly be using your data. And once you understand what you're agreeing to, then yes, like agree to it. I mean, right now, everyone's sharing their data, whether they agree to it or not. So at least when we get to a more structured future of the way that this industry works, then, you know, certainly give people the option to opt in to technologies that will improve their lives, 100%.
So Brittany, this is Chris Bertoy. If you send me a list of all those references and things, we'll make it distributed.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's books, articles, reports, interesting new platforms and technologies that you guys might want to check out. So happy to share.
We do have another question in the chat. So distinguishing between data privacy and data rights, is data privacy a subset of data rights as a topic or cause?
Well, I would say that privacy is a component of it that basically says, how can you keep things private? So how do you protect data that you never want to share? And so that's very important. But I feel like when a lot of times when you use the word privacy, and you don't talk about data protection and data rights, then a lot of people think, yeah, I have the right to keep all my data to myself and I never want to share anything with anyone. And I just don't like that mindset, because that's not the way that the world works. You have to share data in order to use certain services. You have to share data in order to be a citizen of a country. There's many things that you actually have to share. It's nearly impossible to be a completely private citizen and actually still engage in wider society. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be impossible. I'm just saying that that making people comfortable with how technology works, and saying that if you share data for certain purposes and with certain organizations, that's a good thing. It's good for the world. It's good for you. It's good for your family. Like, thinking along those lines is really important. So when we say just privacy, that's more digital identity and encryption technology and privacy by design platforms that never share your data with anyone, like Signal Messenger, DuckDuckGo as a browser. And so it's really important to have those privacy technologies, but those thoughts and those feelings shouldn't need to control your entire life and the way that you feel about technology in general. And so I think it's important to keep people open-minded and to keep people excited about technology that is good and not afraid of what data sharing actually could do for them.
Okay. I know you mentioned earlier about reaching out to our legislative teams to understand or to share what we want going forward. But do you have any suggestions on how we better control the data that the government has about us and shares about us? So for instance, property tax information is public and can be found online, along with names and addresses of people. So that's a lot of important data. Do we have any rights in that? How should we take better steps to control it or limit the access to that type of data?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of that is state by state. So for instance, in the state of Wyoming, no business registrations have names on them. It just has a registered agent, like your lawyer or your CPA. That's just Wyoming is a very privacy-centric state, and so they don't release that type of information. You have to actually subpoena it to find out who owns a company, right? So those are state legislators that you would be talking to, not your federal legislators, about what data is available about you online, more specifically. And it's a lot easier to change state laws than it is to change federal laws. So if you feel like you live in a state where there's too much information that is available about you online, then it's very possible to propose that changes, and you can talk to your local legislator. By talk to, I mean, you don't have to make a meeting with them. You can send them and their team an email, or you can leave a voicemail. No one's in their office anyway. So you leave that voicemail and their team will record that information, and then they can represent that in your state Congress. But I would say regulation of how government uses data, regulation of how the companies that we interact with use data, for me, is the same conversation. Like, what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed. And that's something that I work on at the same time. Like I said, on the coronavirus contact tracing data, that was about, like, how can law enforcement use data that is perhaps collected through government partnerships with Google and Apple and things like that. So I definitely feel similarly about both entities, but through your citizenship, there is certain data that just you as a human being, you have to share with the government. Unfortunately, you can't opt out of that. So it's a little different because every single company that you interact with is a choice.
Okay. Next question from the chat. What are your thoughts on individuals proactively faking data on their own social profiles to ruin the personal data these companies have on you?
I don't think it is very effective because what people are thinking while they're doing it is, oh, I'm tricking them, I'm tricking the algorithms, I'm giving them bad data. But those companies own much more data about you than you could possibly produce by just, typing a few things or searching for the wrong things. They might know billions of things about you, depending on how much online cookie data they've purchased or how good you are at using VPNs or not. They might know everything you've ever searched for your entire life, for instance. So I don't think any of that, like, fake data activism, actually does anything, because companies definitely know more about you than you would possibly be able to give them in your spare time. And that's just reality, unfortunately.
That's scary. Billions of data points.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Depends how often you use devices, how many devices you have. But yeah.
So another question. We talked about, or you talked about Section 230, and the previous administration was against it. How does the current administration, how do you think that they feel about it? That's one question. And the other question is this legislation wave that's going to be coming for data privacy. When do you see it potentially hitting? And any other thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So so the thing about being against Section 230, I also think it's completely incorrect, because I think if platforms are hosting content, which in general would be illegal if someone said it out loud in a town square, like, that shouldn't be allowed, right? But also thinking that a platform that's just hosting people publishing stuff, which is what it says right now, that's obviously not the case. When we're thinking about the amount of people that get their news or get their information about what's going on in the world from social media, more people are getting that from social media than actual media sources these days. And that's a disaster when these platforms have no responsibility for the content that is on their platform, and they can indiscriminately choose to censor things or not. It's not that they're enforcing the law, they're randomly choosing what they want. They're having algorithms that are being trained by groups of human beings that have their own biases, that are choosing what they think is okay and what they think is not okay. Now, getting rid of Section 230 and making Facebook and Twitter more similar to a news organization also doesn't make sense, because they're not news publishers. So they're not like the New York Times or something like that, where they have a journalistic code of ethics where they need to fact check and can't cite single anonymous sources. They're not that's not what this is about. It's meant for social interaction between people. So, for instance, there might be a change to Section 230 where if something is a link that purports to be news, that they might have a responsibility to double check that that is real news. Or they might have the responsibility to, as I said before, identity check their users so that if a user puts up illegal content, that user is held responsible. But I think no matter what, the main issue with Section 230 is that it leaves us in a no man's land where nobody has liability. Platform has no liability and the individuals have no liability. So I definitely am excited to see what the administration is going to do. There are varying opinions in the people that have been appointed by the Biden administration, but the single kind of thread throughout all of the people who care about these issues in the administration is that passing a national data protection and privacy law is at the top of their agenda. And that's just not, definitions of data rights. Some of the data legislation that has been proposed in the past couple of years that has just been sitting in Congress gets as technical as, banning algorithmic amplification, which basically means that artificial intelligence algorithms push up content where they've learned that content gets more engagement. So for instance, unfortunately, due to our psychology, fear-based messaging, hateful messaging gets more engagement. And so algorithmic amplification puts some of the worst things that you could possibly see to the top of your newsfeed because it's human nature to more quickly engage on something that makes you angry or afraid. And that there are bills literally to ban the way that your newsfeed works that are part of national data legislation, right? So there's a huge amount of variety of things that are possible. There's a lot of different topics to be covered besides Section 230 and personal data and privacy definitions and social media regulation. There's a lot out there, but no matter what, I know that it's at the top of this administration's agenda. So I think over the next, I would say you'll probably see some headline news in the next couple weeks about some of the things that are being proposed because the administration is trying to put their best foot forward and pass a lot of things quickly. You'll see that over the next couple weeks, but over the next couple months, we'll probably have more hearings publicly in Congress, which will lead to serious debates and votes on these laws. I would say we'll definitely see it in the first half of this year.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
We have a couple more questions in the chat. I think this is going back to the billions of data points you mentioned and how our, going onto the web is tracked so much, but I'll kind of summarize the couple different questions. So essentially, is there best practice for maintaining privacy online? So is anonymous browsing helpful? Is using DuckDuckGo safer and more legitimate than other browsers? How do we minimize the amount of data points that are collected based on our searches online?
Yeah, absolutely. So use Brave browser, DuckDuckGo, definitely. They do not sell or share your data for any purposes ever. They don't even collect it themselves. So that I think is first step. Stop using Google Chrome. Please stop doing it. That number one. Other privacy by design platforms, use Signal Messenger instead of WhatsApp. On February 8th, WhatsApp is going to start sharing all of your data with Facebook. I know probably a lot of people thought they were already doing that, but they weren't. So now all of your WhatsApp data will be shared with Facebook as if you've put it on Facebook. And you think it's a private encrypted messenger. So I would suggest using Signal for anything that you actually want to keep private, especially phone conversations as well. If you want something else that is also pretty well encrypted, I mean, iMessage and FaceTime are pretty well encrypted. Apple has gotten pretty safe, but as you probably know, basic SMS and regular phone calls are recorded by many different government agencies and also shared with certain companies, right? So think about that in your daily life. But if you're trying to produce less information with just what you do on a daily basis for work or in your personal time, it's more about search browsers. So Brave and DuckDuckGo definitely are the best options. Brave will pay you for searching, which is great. But DuckDuckGo is also incredible technology. Those guys were the pioneers. I was using DuckDuckGo when I was a kid. So it's been around for a while, certainly.
Okay.
Do you know any companies? Do you know any corporations that are integrating DuckDuckGo and Brave? Are you aware of?
Yeah, all the companies that I advise. I sit on 15 different boards, and I don't really know anyone that uses Google Chrome in their daily life. I only do if there's like a platform that says you have to use Google Chrome for it to work. I will still try it on Brave or DuckDuckGo before I'll run it on Google Chrome. So I have Google Chrome installed, but I won't open it unless I'm forced to.
Okay. So another question from the chat is, Revoke is based in the UK. Is it still suitable for US citizens? And then are there other apps or services for US citizens to use effectively? And last kind of question is, any tips about clearing our data and safeguarding it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Revoke is, based in the UK. It's actually based on the Isle of Jersey, which is Privacy Island, is what they're known as usually. And it's basically both GDPR compliant and CCPA compliant. So if you want to demand your data under GDPR, under CCPA, no matter where you live, you can use it. Obviously, for companies that are not observing either of those laws, then there's only so much you can do. So, for instance, if it's a company that is based in Minnesota and only has Minnesota clients and doesn't do any business in California or Europe, then they might say that you can't get your data from them using this application. But otherwise, most companies that have European and Californian clients, which are most bigger companies, you serve people from all over the world, then you can definitely use that app. Otherwise, right now, that's the only automated option that I know about. The process of doing that by yourself is really arduous. You have to file something called an SAR, so it's a subject access request under GDPR, and you would have to do that individually for tens of thousands of companies, and you wouldn't even know which companies to send it to in the first place. So it's really difficult to do as an individual, unfortunately, to enforce your data rights. But if you have enough time on your hands, you can definitely do that. And in terms of safeguarding your personal data, the most important thing to do, like if you were actually to start getting copies of your data, of what all these companies hold on you, I would suggest holding it either on a private server or on an encrypted hard drive and keeping it until you start using platforms that allow you to fully take advantage of all of your data. I would say have those companies delete it, keep it for yourself so that you can use it whenever you want, and make sure not to put it on something like Google Drive or on an unsecured email server or something like that. So that's what I would recommend right now. As I said, there's not a lot of options for taking advantage of all of your data or making your data portable, which is what the word really is. Portability means your data can be taken from one company or platform and easily used on another. But there's a lot of companies that are just building the infrastructure to help your data easily translate into other platforms. So like if I wanted to download and take all my data off of Facebook, then when a new social media platform that I liked popped up, then I would be able to upload all my Facebook data and still have all my friends and the groups that I'm a part of and stuff like that. I'll have all of that information available in that platform. So we're getting there. Not there yet, but I would recommend that if you are motivated to go through that cleaning process of getting your data out from companies where you don't want them to have it anymore, that you store it somewhere privately yourself, and hopefully one day soon you'll be able to easily upload that into safe platforms and make use of that for your own personal benefit.
Okay, thank you. We have another question similar to what you were just speaking about. Any opinion on, I'm probably going to say this wrong, but Abine Delete Me or Abine Delete Me? It looks like an app that scrubs your information from common data brokers.
Nice. I don't know about it. Okay, Abine Delete Me. Okay, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to look at it when we get off this meeting. Or after my next call, because I don't know them. I've never heard of them.
So I have a question, again, going back to kids in school and them being completely online right now. They're essentially being forced to use Google, and they need to store everything on Google Drive, use Gmail, it's essentially on the Google platform. While it's free and it was nice of Google to do that, how do we, it just seems like such a security concern, a data concern, a concern on many different levels. Have you heard of any legislation that is moving forward to help secure educators and education systems, students, what have you, for something like this? I know it's a little bit different with COVID, but we're going to continue to be a digital platform and utilize the digital world through education for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, absolutely. There are groups working on that, not just people who do legislative drafting, but a lot of advocacy groups that work with legislators to understand the gravity of the problem. This is pretty common, actually, unfortunately, that big companies will give away software to schools for free, and it seems like a wonderful donation, but really what they're doing is collecting as much data as possible from children so that they can start targeting them as users and consumers as soon as they're able to do that. Yeah, it's pretty dark, actually, that whole strategy, and really gross. And so that's where I think it's important for more teachers and like school administrators and people in the Department of Education to understand these things, because they think they're taking a philanthropic free gift from a company, but really that company is data mining from children. And so there's been plenty of lawsuits against Google and Facebook, for instance, for abusing the data of children and putting children in harm's way due to targeting them using their information. And it's getting better. It's not great. I definitely, when I talk with schools, I recommend that, if they have alternatives, that they do that. And it's not obviously financially viable for every school, but I think that hopefully we'll soon be in a place where companies will not be allowed to do that. There are more regulations around how children's data is used, but again, these are state-based laws. So we really need federal legislation that stops multinational corporations from engaging in this type of predatory behavior.
Agreed. Are there any other solutions that are relatively cost effective for schools that are out there and available right now?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ones that both like companies can use and school can use. Like there's lists of other options. It's just
Okay.
Google is the biggest, and therefore other people have it. And so it's easier to, I suppose, convince people to use it because it's so familiar. So when I send all of you guys resources, I can send you a list of other types of, databases, CRMs, email servers, like stuff like that, which are, other options besides Google. It's just, yes, Google is one of the easiest to use because they have the most money from collecting our data to be able to make their services as user-friendly as possible. But unfortunately, Google has more data about us than any other company in the world. And so continuing to give them that information is not something I'd like to engage in, but I understand that it's not that easy to opt out. I just hope I'm able to protect my own children from that happening.
Yes. Excited for more regulation around this. Knowing that we're coming up on the top of the hour, there were some additional questions about, secure email recommendations and storage platforms, things like that. But you had just mentioned that you will be sending over additional resources about those things.
Absolutely.
So we have time for maybe one more question if there's another question out there. Okay, well, I think
This is awesome, Brittany. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you over and over again. What you're doing is absolutely incredible, and you're an angel. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for being here and caring about it. Really looking forward to, continuing to engage with you guys. I'll share all those resources for you. And if you ever have, questions that come up, the organizers have my email, so feel free to pass on questions to me or anything like that. Always happy to help. And never be afraid to email me twice.
Well, thank you again. We'll go ahead and close out these meetings. Again, we want to thank you for everything that you've helped to share today. We are all walking away having learned a lot more from the information that you shared. So thank you. Thank you as well to Jim Rivas from CSA and Sinai from Okta. We appreciate your involvement in today's chapter meeting. And CSA Minnesota always wants to be an educational resource for people. It is a free membership, so please reach out to csamn.com to learn more information about CSA. We will be able to post resources on this presentation and others on the site as well. So we appreciate everyone's attendance, and I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany.
Thank you, everyone. Great job, Rachel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.